Hi, and welcome to this week's edition of Crosshairs, the program at ThePrint, where we discuss the big national or regional security issue of the week. I'm joined by someone I'm sure you've seen on TV and here at ThePrint, General D.S. Huda, who was India's Northern Army commander. The reason we're here today is that I'm sure you've all been hearing about the recent tragic encounter in Kokarnag, which claimed the lives of three security force officials. There have also been a string of incidents in the Pir Panjal mountains in Kashmir. General Huda had a great deal of hands-on experience in the region. In the immediate aftermath of the India-Pakistan crisis in 2001-2002, when violence had fled to hideous levels in that region. And I thought we'd try and draw him out today on what lessons we could learn from this, particularly in terms of building long-term durable peace, which was achieved at that point, even though people thought the region had gone to flames forever. Thank you, sir, for making the time to join us. My first question, I want to take you back to that immediate sort of period after the Operation Parakram and the crisis in Pakistan. Violence for the first time in the Pir Panjal region had become a big public issue at that point. There were large groups of the Lashkar-e-Taiba and other terrorists roaming in the area. Can you give us a little bit of context about why that region had become so important to terrorists and why violence had spiraled or seemed to spiral out of hand at that point?
So, Praveen, thank you very much for inviting me to the show. As you are saying, late 90s, early 2000s was the time when we in the army used to say that the arc of terrorism has spread beyond the Kashmir Valley and is moved out into the Jammu region. And that was the period we saw a very large-scale infiltration taking place, from the Poonch Rajouri districts into areas in the depth of Surankot and Hill Kaka and those regions, and lot of sort of spread of violence. In fact, there was a time when violence was almost equal in both the Jammu and Kashmir regions.
My God. Okay, so yeah. It wasn't a Kashmir problem anymore. It was also a Jammu problem. I mean, very, very literally.
In fact, Praveen, what is not known to people, if you look at the deployment of forces that came into Jammu region. So you had the Rashtriya Rifles, which was there, the Delta and the Romeo Force. 27 Mountain Division from, the east was pushed in, and it was pushed into the Jammu region. 39 Mountain Division, which was the reserve for Northern Command, was also pushed into the Jammu region. 9 Mountain Brigade was also pushed into the Jammu region. So, I mean, that should give you an idea of sort of the scale of the problem, that had occurred at that time, because Pakistan was really wanting not that, it's only Kashmir Valley which is troubled, but also the complete J&K. The Jammu region also sees violence, and so as you said, a lot of foreign terrorists, Lashkar-e-Taiba, Jaish were pushed inside.
So why was that mountain belt, the Pir Panjal mountains, of such importance? Because after all, these are not populated areas, which are cities, very forested, remote areas. Why would it be important for terrorists who want to make a public point or a statement?
See, the thing was, the Pir Panjal range, frankly, was not very heavily policed at that time by the army. It was also because of its remoteness, an area where terrorists could create, hideouts and stay. I mean, the Sat Vinash operation that took place in 2003, where a very large hideout of terrorists was there. They were also getting some level of sort of local support initially from the Gujar Bakarwal community. So this was an area where they found, and also, the separation between Jammu and Kashmir. So it was also very easy for them to slip over the Pir Panjal from Jammu region into the Kashmir region. So this whole belt was sort of very important. And as I said, while initially there was some support, I think the waning of insurgency in Jammu region is largely due to how this local support faded. And the Gujar Bakarwal community actually came out in support of, the Indian state.
So I wanted to come to that very question, sir, because the Bakarwal or some elements of this community have traditionally, in addition to being shepherds and buffalo herds, also made a, if you like, supplementary living from being traffickers across the border, small-time smugglers. And of course, the terrorist groups also turned to them to do their work. Um, how did you set about, and this is also a community that has been very alienated by the political system. They are poor people. They didn't feel they had any representation in government. So when you began working in that region, how did you convince people that, look, you should support the state instead of just making a few rupees when you can?
So again, Praveen, it was actually a very small group of people who acted as guides for terrorists. Largely, this was a community. If I could say the kind of support insurgency had among the say Kashmiri Muslims in the valley, that kind of support was never there among the Gujar Bakarwal community. Traditionally, these are people who have worked very closely with the army. I mean, look at the Punch operation of 1947, for example. I mean, the local communities there and the army have worked together. So traditionally, there is this close sort of approach that is there between the army and the local community. Also, I mean, to give them credit, it was also they themselves felt that they are being harassed too much by these foreign terrorists who come, and that they don't understand what the local sort of customs and sort of traditions are. The women were getting targeted by these terrorists. These massacres that have taken place in places like Kot Sharwal, etc., where the Gujar Bakarwal community was specifically targeted by the terrorists. This also actually turned them against the terrorists and the security forces. And let me give credit also to the local police there and the army and the Rashtra Rifle units, then made a very deliberate effort to co-opt these people and said, look, we are here to support you because you're getting targeted by terrorists. And that's when this sort of close relationship assistance started between the Gujar Bakarwal communities. I mean, this is where, if you recall, the village defense committees that were largely set up were mostly Hindus who were staying, in the Doda Kishtwar area. This Punch Rajouri belt is where you saw first Muslim VDCs being set up.
So I was hoping you could tell us a little bit more about that, because there's one village in particular where just the other day, some friends were fondly remembering you, a place called Mada, and where they were telling me about how, despite some resistance, you had armed and equipped the villagers to fight back against the terrorists. In fact, they were, played an important role in Satvinash and won some of the boys from that community won national honors also as a result. I was hoping you could share the story a little bit.
Yeah. So, Mara is an area where initially there were, when this whole insurgency broke out, there were a number of people who were working in Saudi Arabia. Tahir Fazal was one of those people. And his brother was killed. And he came back from Saudi Arabia and said, look, we need to mobilize our community to support the army and to fight against the terrorists. And they formed what was then called, Pir Panjal Scout. Shiv Sahai also played a very, big role in
the police officer who then served in the National Security Council, sir.
Yeah. He played a big role in, sort of getting these people together, as did the local sort of, Rashtra Rifle units. And these were the people then who came out with a lot of information, helped fight back against terrorists who, there have been cases where these village defense committees, which were formed, have actually fought back against terrorists trying to, carry out some killings in the villages. The first all-women VDC, all-women Muslim VDC was from Mara village.
Wow.
So really, I mean, you have to give them credit. And if you look at, how insurgency was pushed back from this area, yes, you can say, the military played its role. But I think a great deal of credit goes to the local community, because the minute you lose local support, then the survival of the terrorists in that area is very, very difficult.
So I'm going to come back to this question of local support, sir, but a question in the middle, just as a layperson. One of the things you think after these tragic incidents, of attacks on the army by highly trained terrorists, and in many cases they've managed to slip away. A layperson's reaction is, oh, if we have 100 soldiers, why don't we have 1,000 in the forests? Or why don't we have 10,000? So we flush it out once and for all. As a military commander, you've never been an enthusiast for putting more and more people. Can you explain a little bit behind this, why having more people doesn't solve the problem by itself?
No, Praveen, it doesn't, because ultimately, so our whole idea is that have small team focused operations which are intelligence based, and so you can go in and you can go out. There is no sort of trouble to the civil population. And that's the way, and you have a group of highly trained people and you go in and carry out your operation. I mean, this whole idea of you put in 1,000 guys is also that you're putting many more targets on the ground, which are not required. I mean, there is a limit to how many people can operate in a tactical way in a particular area. So just putting in 1,000 people means you're actually, possibly having greater vulnerability. Because
Right.
you have these two or three terrorists who are hidden somewhere, and the more targets sort of pop up and the more targets they see, there is a likelihood of more casualties. So, I mean, this is a very fine balance of how many troops should actually be employed for operations.
So just to flesh that out a little bit, I think one of the things people don't understand is how vast and difficult that terrain is. So I'm guessing finding, say, 2 terrorists who are hiding in a great stretch of forest, even if you have drones or the latest electronic equipment, it's not a very easy thing.
No, it isn't. You've been there when you've seen the terrain, and some of us say, oh, it looks beautiful, the forests are beautiful, the mountains are beautiful. But this is the kind of terrain which actually favors the terrorists. Because there is such thick cover, the ground is broken. It's very easy to find small places to, where you can hide. And there are limits to technology. I mean, after all, the drones can only see if there is visibility. And the tree cover actually hides the visibility. There are small caves where, these terrorists can go and sort of hide themselves. So trying to search for 2 people, and then you see the operation has gone on over now, possibly more than 2 nights. Today's possibly the 3rd night. At night, if we think we can, completely seal off this area, we've had instances where, from meters away, quietly a terrorist can just, get away, even when there are so many people, who are deployed in that area. We have seen terrorists sneak into camps which are heavily guarded.
Right.
And the camps which have walls, which have fences and everything. So, I mean, that should give you an idea that if you are absolutely out in the open in a forested area, it's just not easy to, identify.
Right. And I'm guessing the same way the Indian Army or you used to train your soldiers to sneak in and out of difficult situations, to attack targets. The terrorists are also being trained at their camps in similar skills. It's not a question of an army fighting some untrained guy who doesn't know what he's doing.
Yeah, I'm sure these people are in. After all, when we did the surgical strike and everybody talks about, we sent hundreds of people across into camps, sneaking across, what is possibly the most heavily defended border in the world. So, I mean, that should give an idea that there are limits to how much, you can check a few people who want to sort of sneak inside.
A few people who know what they're doing. So moving on to this community issue, we see again that across the Pir Panjal, a lot of resentment among the Gujjar Bakarwal community in particular, because they feel that the promises or the rewards that they should have got for supporting India in those very difficult years, that they have not got an adequate share of the rewards. In fact, they complained that many development projects that were started in that period, like roads and other civic infrastructure, yes, it was done for some time, but then leaders changed, politicians changed, and people forgot about it. Would you accept that as a fair criticism from their side?
I would accept that, although Praveen, it's not as if attempts have not been made. Development works, trying to get their children into. I remember giving them a number of positions in the Rajouri Army Public School, where they could come, give them hostel accommodation, etc. But it frankly is not enough. I mean, it's a community that really, particularly the Bakarwals, they have problems. They're moving around. Half the education of their children suffers. Economically, they're backward. So I think there is some justification in their complaint that while we have helped out the Indian state, and that's how they talk, in pushing back insurgency from Jammu, maybe some of our work has not got the recognition that it does. And in the recent past, some issues about reservations of Pahadis, etc., is also something that they have protested about.
Right, sir. In fact, very complicated issue because the Gujars and Bakarwals believe that the Pahadis, who are sometimes upper castes and relatively well off, are going to eat into their share of reservations. The Pahadis, of course, have a different view on this. Do you see this as a solvable problem with goodwill, or do you think the schisms between these communities are too deep for some accommodation?
No, I don't think they're too deep. If they were too deep, we would have seen it in the past, and we haven't really seen a deep divide between the Pahadis and the Gujar Bakarwal communities. Although yes, I mean, communities would like their development, etc. And I think an outreach by the government to satisfy the Gujar Bakarwal communities and tell them that you are not going to be hurt with this reservation would help. I would also recommend that the police and the army who's operating in this area sort of try and re-establish this connect that we had in the past with the Gujar Bakarwal communities. Sometimes when things become fine, violence is not there. In the period, say 2012 to 14-15, I mean, Jammu region was absolutely quiet, not a single incident. Sometimes this lulls us into some kind of complacency that things are okay. So you really the outreach sometimes weakens with the local communities, and that's something that I think we need to re-establish.
So, final question, sir. If you had advice to young officers today who are operating in that region, whether with the army or the police or the CPMFs, I would assume that building trust with a community is not an easy thing to do, especially when there is suspicion about the government's motives or whatever. What would your advice be to young officers on how to go about doing it?
I think you have to have. The problem sometimes, Praveen, is that people don't have a little historical perspective of what has gone on before they came in. Sometimes, the Bakarwal community is also looked at with suspicion that these are people providing guides. Infiltration to some extent is happening, and maybe these are the communities that are involved. But again, the foundational principle of success in counterinsurgency, counter-militancy is that the people are at the heart of the solution, and therefore, if popular support is not there, automatically, militancy will, over a period of time, fade. And so, this connect with the local people is extremely important, and that is what I would sort of advise not only young officers but starting from the top. Say that we need to get a very close sort of connect going with the Gujar Bakarwal communities. It has been of tremendous value in the past, and it can be of tremendous value in the future. And I say that because we are seeing some signs of revival of militancy happening in the Jammu region. And, it's something that needs to be nipped in the bud straight away.
Right. Thank you so much, General Huda. I hope people who are in a position to matter are listening to your words, because we all lived through that horrible period in the late 90s and early 2000s. Many people, Hindus and Muslims, butchered in terrible circumstances. And I hope this time officers keep their front doors open and we nip the problem in the bud. Thank you, sir, for taking the time.
Thank you, Praveen. Thank you so much.